Okay, well, I think we can get going now. It's a few minutes after 7. It's my pleasure to welcome everyone to the second of a series of presentations by the Pennsylvania Postal History Society. And our presenter tonight is the illustrious Charles D. DiComo, well known to most of you. I'm not going to go through his achievements and his awards and everything because there are too many who take up all the time of the presentation. But I think without any further ado, Charlie is going to talk about a very interesting cover to India and back in the 1850s. So I would like to ask everyone who hasn't already if you would mute your microphones and turn it over to Charlie, who's going to share his screen, I assume. Go ahead, Charlie.
Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate, Steve, the introduction, and I appreciate, everybody tuning in tonight for what hopefully will be an interesting story here from a little cover that I found a few years back, and it'll kind of take you on a journey around the planet and back again in the 1850s. What I'll do is I'll start to share my screen. If you want to hold your questions to the end, please do, although I don't mind you asking it in the middle of it. We do have a chat window off to the right where you can fill in your questions. I know Steve Kennedy is monitoring that, and that would then help us when we get to the end to make sure that we don't forget the questions that you have. And again, like I said, I appreciate it. I'm happy to share this after the presentation. Again, open to any questions and comments as we go through this. So let me share my screen. And you should note that I know it's being recorded. Steve Kennedy does a phenomenal job after the recording of editing this down so that you can actually, take a look at it in its format cleanly. So I'm going to stop sharing my video so everybody can see my screen. Can you see that now? Slide number 1.
Yes.
Great,
yes.
Thank you, Steve. Excellent. So let me take you on a journey. I don't only like postal history. I like stamps. I like maps. I like all sorts of things outside of postal history. But what I'm going to talk about this evening is a story from the United States to farther India and back again. And it's a story about a 5-month journey of a Baptist missionary cover in 1856, 1857. And I put both years there because it transited both years. And the challenge when I found and discovered this cover was really to determine the rates and the routes. And little did I know it would take me down a human interest story, a postal history story, a Baptist missionary story when I started doing the research. And so let me go to the next slide. Hopefully this will work. There you go. So this is the cover that I am going to be discussing this evening. And at first blush, you would look at this cover and say, this is an amazingly busy cover. If I move my mouse, can you see that on the screen?
Yes.
Oh, great, good. So here is the front of this little blue cover. And there are easily 20 different markings on this cover. It is a very busy cover with the address here to the Reverend. We'll get into that later, and the address in Farther India. You'll see a number of red and black cancels, even orange. You'll see a little return address here to Boston. You've got rate markings, 80, paid on the back. Just a lot of things going on here. And this intrigued me the moment I saw it.
Sorry,
how could I?
If you wait just a second, somebody else is sharing their screen. Cindy, if you would stop sharing your screen, please. There's a button at the top that says stop sharing.
Oh, I see that. I just lost it.
Yeah, Charlie, you might be able to grab it back because you're a co-host.
Yeah, so let me try to grab it back. Let's see. Yeah. So do you see my screen?
Yes, it's all good.
Okay. All right, thank you. No, not a problem. So let me go back. So the challenge when I found this cover was to decipher really the trip that this little cover took. And I show part of the back in the lower right, which shows 2 3-cent 1851 stamps. We'll talk about that, stamps of the period. It even shows this little nice clean area where what I will show you another set of stamps were to make up the postage rate, which are missing. So I was intrigued from a number of different areas. What was on the back here to make up the rate? How do you look at all of these various cancels to figure out how this cover made it from point A to point B? And so that's the story I'm going to take you on tonight. And can it be done? As I say at the top, and the answer is yes. And so again, I have here in the bottom, I acquired this in 2018. It was in a mixed lot of transatlantic postal history, lots of different covers going, from the US to different parts of the world, to Europe, to other parts of Asia. It's on a really wafer thin, very blue paper envelope. It has been sealed all around. And as we'll find out, it is dated 1856, 1857. So this is the trip that I want to take you on. This is the journey. I want to give you an overview of the cover, the obverse and the reverse. I want to begin the journey by how do you reveal all of those cancels? There's really good tools out there which allow you to uncover the cancels and really start to diagnose the cover. I want to then follow the cancels because the cancels are going to take us on this journey around the planet. And each one had a purpose and each one was used to follow this cover to its final destination and back. We'll then look at the rates as well. And the rates are important as well to help you diagnose who handled the cover and the cost that it was not inexpensive to send mail of this type and this size halfway around the world back in the 1850s. I'll conclude the journey. I'll tell you a little bit about the ships that I was able to discover, which carried the actual letter. And then I will show you what I believe the cover actually looked like back in 1856 when it was mailed. And so all of this sleuthing makes for a really interesting story. But let's start at the top. Let's look at the front of the cover. And let's start. There are over 20 cancels and manuscript marks on this cover. You'll see a few black. Here's a cancel. Here's a black New York cancel. Here's a red cancel. Here's an orange cancel. Another double circle red, red. You'll even see some very faint cancels that I will show you we can uncover. There's a red rectangle here. There's a large red box here. And you'll see all the manuscript markings. Paid 90, paid on the back. 80 in magenta, paid 90. The address is buried in here, and you can see it if you look closely. But this cover went from the US, and it started right here with this black cancel in the upper right, and that is Warren, Ohio. This little cover started in Warren, Ohio, the state right next to us here in PA, and it did travel actually through Pennsylvania. We'll talk about that in August of 1856. And high level, it went from the US to Great Britain, across Egypt to India to Father India. This little cover took a very long journey to Father India, and it actually happened to come back because the recipient was not there. And I will tell you that story as we go through it. So again, keep in mind the busyness of the front of this cover. You see mail today that you see one cancel usually from where it was sent and you receive it. This cover back then, 1850s, was touched by many, many folks along the way. And the other thing about this cover is that it had a return back. And so a little sneak peek is this was mailed in August. There was an AUG up here in Warren. And right away, you could see that there's a January 28th, New York. So it already gives you an idea that it left in 56 and it came back in 57. We'll talk about that in more detail. Let's go to the back of the cover. Here's the reverse. Where is the postage paid? If you look at the front of the cover, it did say paid 90. But yet when you turn the back, because there was not enough room on the front of the cover to put the postage, this did have 90 cents on it when it was originally sent. And it was 45 cents, which was a lot of money back in the 1850s to send a letter. And it was a double weight letter. So they had to double the fee. So it was 90 cents. This was US to India. This is how it got there. That was a 45 cent rate times 2. So all that is on, at least left on this, is the pair of 3-cent 1851s. These are number 11s, black 7-bar grid cancel, very typical of the era. But it is missing, and you could see the little shadow of a shape of what was here. And somebody contend this was not taken off back in the 1850s. This was probably taken off in recent years. This contained 9 12-cent 1851 stamps. This is number 17. It was probably either a strip of 3 and a strip of 4, or it could have been a block of 7. But that was what was here in this space, which had cancel on it and another cancel on top of it and another cancel tying it. Somebody even knew when they removed this, and you could see a little bit of the paper here if you look closely when they tried to remove it. They actually wrote down the position of the stamps that were on there. You can plate these issues specifically to the plate, to the position, to the pane. So somebody, when this was removed, knew what they were removing. And all that was left was the cover as I received it when I received it in that mixed box. We'll come back to this later. Really important. So where do I begin? How do I take all of these cancels on the obverse, even the cancels on the reverse, and how do I begin to reveal the cancels? So there's a really great tool free on the website that anybody can use. It's called retroReveal, if you're not aware of it. And it's a free discovery tool online. It's hosted by the University of Utah. And their mission is to facilitate collaborative discovery of hidden content in documents, manuscripts, music, and artifacts. If you have a digital image that you take on your phone or your scanner, you can go to their site, retroReveal.org. You can create an account if you'd like or not. You can upload your image and it can be processed for free, as I'm going to show you. And it can uncover really interesting things on a document, on a letter, or in this case, on a cover. So here's the original cover that I scanned in 1200 dpi on my scanner. I use a simple Cano scanner, LIDE 700F, nothing fancy, but it's a workhorse and I've been using it for years. Here's the original cover, in regular light. Here is one example of when I uploaded it into this tool and I processed it. This is one of the many color spaces that it pushed out. It's not simply like if anybody here has used Photoshop and they adjust contrast or they adjust brightness. You can see the difference. This literally changes the color space, the saturation, the lightness, whether red is shown or green is shown or blue is shown. And so if you look down here, I think right away you can see this particular color space only highlights the black ink and it masks the red. I think you can see that it mutes all of the red cancels. So they don't appear now because in this color spectrum, you remove them. It now makes it easier to read the address, the name, where it went to Asia. All of these reds go away in this particular color space. A very useful tool to extract this information. And you could just see a light whisper of a shadow of what's here, but it gets rid of the red. Let's go to the next slide. Here again is the original cover. Here is a different color space. This is called the YXY color space. There's many of them and they get very technical. But you don't have to worry about the technicality of them. What you really want to look and see when you're searching through retroReveal is you want to see how it helps to unmask other cancels that are on your cover. There's a very faint manuscript 2 here on the lower right, which is now very bold. You can see that 2, which you might not have seen before. The black ink gets muted and the red starts to pop out. And now you see this highlighted red box that's underneath this red cancel. This very faint red double circle cancel here now shows itself. There is an amazingly prominent 1D right here. You could see it before, but now you cannot miss it. Here is sort of this rectangular octagonal shaped tombstone, if you will, cancel. And a number of others really pop out. Here is a different way in the upper right to show the different cancels. Again, different ways to use different changes in color space. This one happens to be the color space that engineers use for the original black and white television. So there's a lot of very interesting color spaces that this is. The good news is, and I'll go back, when you're on this website, all you do is upload your image, you hit process, and it gives you a full web page of about 30 images that are all in these various color spaces. And it allows you to save them to your hard drive, and you can look at them at your leisure, and you could do your investigation. This works with manuscripts. This works with, I've uploaded other documents. If you have type that's very light, that's written very light and you can't see, this helps to bring out that type and that script. So, the handwriting. So a really useful tool that now I used. I spent hours looking at various images. What did I come up with? I was able to now follow the cancels using a trail of breadcrumbs from this. And I put this Bombay cancel here. This is one of those cancels that you didn't see right away buried on the front of that cover, that absolutely is on the front of that cover, that retroReveal was able to show for me. So here is in written form how I followed the cancels that I was able to unmask. And then I will show you in picture form what each one of those looks like on the trip that this cover took. So in 1856 in August, there is a Warren, August 22nd, Ohio cancel. That's the first one I showed you before. There is then a red August of 1856, New York 7, British packet, August 26th paid. This is a New York packet, which actually it went up to Boston and took a ship out of Boston over to England. I'll go into details of this. You saw it took about 4 days when it went into the mail to cross Pennsylvania to get to New York. That's how long it took on a railroad. We'll talk about that. Then there's a September orange, paid 8, September 8, 1856, London. It left New York, it left Boston actually, it made it to London, it got canceled. Then, you can't really see it, but when you look under retroReveal, this is the cover. This is what that red cancel looks like. It says India paid underneath all of this red. There is an India paid hand stamp that was applied in Southampton in England. Then there's an 1856 red rectangle, the Bombay. I will show you that. It resembles the black one I showed you on the slide before. So now we're traveling to India. Then there is in October a Calcutta, CAL, short for Calcutta. This is a Calcutta transit. They handled the mail. They had to put a cancel on it. And then by November, it finally made it to its destination in Akyab, in Far East Asia, in Burma, current day Burma, November 1st, 1856. This is the receiver. Let's just pause for a second. The cover left Ohio, August 22nd. It arrived at its destination, November 1st. That's quite a trip. We'll go into details about that trip. The good news is it made it to its destination. All for 90 cents, mind you. But then what's interesting, and what, again, when I looked at this cover, I went, wow, it took another trip. It went back to Calcutta, November 14th, 1856. It went back to London. There's a London transit, January 11th. There's a Southampton transit, January 12th. And then there's a New York receiver, January 28th. It made a global 6-month, 5.5-month journey. So now I'm really curious as to what happened. Why did it go there and come all the way back? Which is, again, the second part of this story. But that is what I was able to diagnose by using this tool, retroReveal. And, I use my 30X and I use my loops and, my larger powered scopes to look at everything. And when you do this and then looking under magnification, you come up with this trip. I will leave this up here. So this is the cancellation trail. Here are the breadcrumbs that I followed from Ohio to Akyab, Burma. This is modern day Sittwe or Arakan, Myanmar. That's where this ended up. But back then it was under, British control, British realm as a colony. And so it was in Akyab, Burma. So let's follow the cancels. Here is the first cancel, Warren, August 22nd, Ohio. It went into the mail. The clerk in Warren struck it with this CDS, canceled the circular date stamp. The stamps were put on. The postage stamps, the 90-cent postage was paid in Warren and put on the back of this cover. It then went to New York City and then to Boston. Here is the New York red cancel that was put on. New York 7, British packet, August 26th. They knew the next steamer leaving for England was the Cunard line steamer Canada. That was the next ship leaving. So this traveled overland or by rail, but it traveled by rail to Boston, where it got on the Canada. This we know from newspaper, from articles, from Lloyd's of London, plenty of resources. We know when ships are leaving. We know when they're arriving. This is very well documented, and I can give you a lot of those references. Many are free online, and so easy to kind of really trace the steps that this letter went. From Boston, the letter went to Liverpool, and then it went to London. Here, buried underneath this black and red cancel, is an orange paid 8 of September 8, 1856. This is a London transit. In London, they added 1D. This is the British colonial credit. This is a very interesting mark, and this is one that you don't often see on many covers. It is a very inconsistently used mark. And this can be found in Michael Lawrence in his 10 cent 1869 postal history book, wrote about this, and he showed a few examples. And it's not consistent. It's an accounting marking. And this marking is really to calculate compensation that's due for the colonial post office to defray the cost of the expenses because they had to handle the mail. They knew that this was going to India, and for accounting, they had to make sure that they reimbursed their colonies with a certain fee. Sometimes you see this, sometimes you don't. It's just not consistent. It's just a little tweak. But we know where the cover's going, so let's keep going. London, this traveled south to Southampton. And out of Southampton, during this period, the P&O steamer was the steamer of choice to travel through the Mediterranean to Alexandria in Egypt, to the Suez, overland, to the Red Sea, Arabian Seas, and to Bombay. This is how you got mail from England to Far East. It had to take that journey. And we'll go into details of that. But when it got there, you now see, and it went to Bombay. Here is the receiver in Bombay. This faint red outline of a rectangle. If you look closely, you could see a B and an O. There's even a Y. Here I've shown below what this cancel looks like in black. It is Bombay. There's a date in the middle, and then it was signed off on. So this did make it to Bombay, where this rectangular red cancel was, which you only see when you use retroReveal. Very hard to make it out. From Bombay, it then traveled on train. You see now we're doing many different types of transportation to get this letter to its destination. It might have even walked at some point. It might have been in a carriage. We definitely know it took rail, and it clearly took a steamer, took a sailing ship or a steamer. And now we're on a railroad getting to, here's a partial strike. It got to Calcutta, C-A-L, and there's the date, 1856. Here is an example of what that cancel would look like from another cover that I have, C-A-L, Cal Cancel, GPO, that's from General Post Office. It made it to Calcutta, and then again, it had to travel by rail to its final destination, and here is Akyab. Very hard to see, but Akyab's here, A-K-Y-A-B. It's a double circle red. Here is what that receiver looks like from another cover I have with the date in the center. There's a date in the center. It's got PO at the bottom for post office, and it made it to its final destination in Burma. Here is Akyab. And so it arrived November 1st. And as it said on the address, it was going to a Reverend Alfred Satterlee at the American Baptist Missionary in Akyab, Arakan, in Farther India. So here is Akyab in Arakan, in Farther India, Asia, which is what it was called back then, which is Burma. So there is your breadcrumbs following the cancels on the front of the cover to make it from Warren, Ohio to Akyab, and it made it. And we know it made it. So now let me continue the journey. Let me show you, because I like maps, and here's one of my contemporary maps, 1855, and this happens to be from the Rumsey collection. I have a similar map. David Rumsey, a phenomenal map collector. His entire collection is online, free to the public, as long as you give him credit, at the David Rumsey collection online. It is tens of thousands of maps from covering what seems to be 1,000 years. And if you want to find a map of anywhere, it's available online. And there is the reference number for this particular map. This is a cropping. Here is Warren, Ohio. It traveled overland by rail. This is the rail line that existed in 1856 into Philly, up across Jersey. These lines still exist, if you're aware of these lines, and I've taken these many times from New York down to DC. Here's New York City. It then traveled up rail, made it to Boston. And here in Boston, it got on the Cunard line steamer, the Canada, to go to Liverpool. And you see, I changed my color of my line to blue because now it's on water. And so I just summarized what I just told you verbally here. This is how it made it overseas. And this is where the manuscript paid 90 and the 90-cent postage stamps were added, were here in Warren. And Warren is important because this is the where the family of the wife of the Reverend is from. And so they were writing to their daughter to see how she was doing while at the American Missionary. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. So now let's continue the journey overseas. So here's another old map, Colton by Rumsey. This is from their collection. It's 1856. It is contemporary. The Cunard line, Canada coming overseas, lands, goes down into, it gets all those cancels. We talked about the London transit. We talked about the Liverpool. We talked about Southampton. And it gets on, as I say here, it gets on the Peninsula and Oriental Steam Navigation Company, which I abbreviated P&O. This is the steamer that left United Kingdom and made its way around Spain and Portugal, through the Strait of Gibraltar, through the Mediterranean, hugging the North African coast, where it went to Alexandria, Egypt. It then traveled overland to the Suez. There was no canal. It then overland got on another ship, and it traveled down through the Red Sea into the Arabian Sea, where it then finally landed in Bombay. As you saw earlier, it got the cancel. It then was now back overland on rail, hugging the coast, where it went to Calcutta. In Calcutta, it got the receiver. It then again made its final journey all the way to Akyab in Burma. So quite a trip for this little cover to make it from Warren, Ohio, from the family, the parents of the Reverend's wife, checking on them to see how they were doing. So let's continue the story. And this is where, again, I really was intrigued about why the letter was returned, because we had those cancels. Here I blow up Hindostan, which is, again, the older name, if you will, for British India back at this time period. Again, it was after landing in Bombay, rail to Calcutta, then to Akyab. I showed you the blow up of Akyab. There was Baptist missionaries peppered throughout this part of the world, throughout all of India and Far East Asia. But why was the letter returned to the US? And this is really where I really dove in here to the human interest side of it. And by the time the letter arrived at the missionary in Akyab in November of 1856, sadly, the Reverend had passed from cholera. He had passed 4 months earlier, on July 1st in 1856, during a trip to Calcutta. So he had already left the mission here. He was at another mission in Calcutta with his wife, Sally, and their newborn daughter, Bella. If you recall, the letter was mailed in August. The family, being this far away, had no idea of what was happening halfway around the world to their wife and their son-in-law, or even that they had a newborn daughter, at least from the records. And so when the letter arrived here after traveling halfway around the planet, they weren't here at the missionary. The Reverend had already left Akyab. He had already passed in July. And his wife, Sally, and their newborn daughter, we believe, were left in Calcutta. So now I started to do more research. I'm going to come back to that in a second. This is really the intriguing piece. They were not there. The letter was then returned to sender. I will get back to the family story in a minute. So let's follow the cancels back. As I showed you earlier, there was this New York January 28th cancel. So, the letter went back. And so here is the departure from Calcutta, went back over rail. It totally went back on the journey I pictured here would have went the same way, would have gone on a ship from Bombay, would have went all the way back here, cross overland, then through the Mediterranean and back to the United Kingdom. So here is the trip from India to Liverpool to London. Here is a London receiver. This says 11 January 11th of January, 1857. It then from London to Southampton, and then it took a trip. And I did find out what ship it came on. I believe I know the ship it came on. I think it was the Arakan. I'll show you that later. Here is a New York receiver. So we left in January and it showed up a couple weeks later. This is when it arrived in New York. It says American packet, January 28th. Here's the receipt. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm pointing to the New York cancel. I meant to show you underneath the New York cancel, which is the Southampton cancel, which is here. Very hard to see underneath, but underneath these 4 cancels is this orange, red-orange paid, and it is DD 12th of January. So that is what this cancel looks like underneath all these 6 cancels. This London Transit is what this orange cancel looks like here. Then it left Southampton. Then it arrived in New York. And you can see it arrived in New York on January 28th of 1857. Which is where they also added this large black 42, which was also on the front of the cover. We'll talk about that rate later. What we had on the front of the cover was a return address that they had put on in Calcutta when they had to return it. Where to return it? BM, rooms. This is for the Baptist Missionary, rooms. Number 33 Somerset Street, Boston, USA. This return address is on the cover, which I will show you. So they had crossed out Calcutta and all of the other where it was going. They knew at the missionary in Calcutta to return the letter back to the Baptist mission. So now I'm searching for this. And what do I find online after a few weeks of searching? I found a picture. It's not from the 1850s, but it's from the 1880s, here at the lower left, of the actual street of Somerset Street in Boston. There's the church, First Baptist Church, at 12. And the BM rooms, 30 Somerset, where this letter went back to, is literally this door right here on the right. So here is the building, Baptist Missionary. This is where this letter came back to in Somerset, Boston. And it did arrive back here. So this was the transit that this cover took when it left Warren, went to India, and then came back. So now I'm intrigued. What happened to the family? So it's amazing when you go online, and it is Satterlee. I think earlier I had Satterlee. It's not S-U-T, it's S-A-T-T. The Satterlees, the Baptist Missionary. There's an amazing amount of volumes and references available online, and this is the one that I actually took a lot of the history from. The Missionary Magazine, 1856, it was published by the American Baptist Missionary Union from that address that I showed you, which is where the letter was returned to. And a lot of what I have bulleted here is from the obituary, which covers 5 pages of this very revered Baptist missionary. And one of the first lines of his obit is Arakan, which is where he was in Akyab, has its representatives in heaven. So a little background. This is what I was able to uncover about the Reverend and his choice here. And this is wrong because he didn't pass in 55, he passed in 56, as we will find. No, it is 55. Yeah, he passed in 55. He was born in Sheldon, Wyoming County, New York. He was a graduate of Brown University in 52, and he went to the Theological Seminary in Rochester in 55. Sally Fuller, his wife, was born in Lisle, New York. They married. Where? In Warren, Ohio. The letter started in Warren, Ohio. That's where her family is from. And that's where they lived for a bit. At least that's where she was when they were working. And so he was inspired by a famous missionary to enlist and to go to Burma. He had a higher calling, as he wrote, and there was some really nice words there that they wrote about him. So let's talk about what I found out. And this again came out of the summary, that on October 16th of 1855, they sailed from Boston to Calcutta. So they sailed from the Baptist Missionary in Boston at Somerset to Calcutta. While there, in June 6th of 55, Bella B was born. She was named after the maternal grandmother, Bella B. Blakes. In 56, as I told you earlier, July 1st, he died of cholera. I do have to change this to 56. My bad. This came out of their reference, and it's not right. He died of cholera while on a trip to Calcutta. Let me remind you that the letter was mailed August 22nd of 56. So he had passed a month earlier. They had sent a letter. I don't have the contents, which I did, probably writing to check on the status of their son-in-law and daughter and seeing how they were doing. So this is what I discovered that was new, that we never would have known, was that on August 27th, an enfeebled Sally, who was now in Calcutta after her husband had died, with her newborn daughter, sailed for Boston. She was leaving the country. She was going back to Boston to the Baptist Missionary. Her husband had died a month and a half earlier. She was already on her way back sailing, and the letter had arrived November 1st of 56. Of course, nobody was home. They weren't not just in Akyab. They weren't in Calcutta. She was already on a ship. What I uncovered was that November 4th, on the ship ride back to the U.S., she died at sea and was buried at sea. And so now there is only the baby Bella on this ship. And to the captain's credit, on this ship, going across for months, the captain, Marcus Hall, they called him out specifically, he was left to care for the baby. He did care for the baby. When he landed in Boston, his first responsibility was to deliver the baby to the missionary, which is what he did to the family members, Sally and Ira Fuller, who were at the missionary. And in 58, 2 years later, she was adopted by her uncle Merritt. They changed her name, Emily, to Emily Adelia. And this baby, who was born in India, in Calcutta, losing her mother and her father, one to cholera, the other one dying at sea, had a very full life and has a very long family tree, and married and had multiple children. And you could follow the history of this baby who was born into this scenario of a Baptist missionary, 1856, 57. There's a lot more information on this family. It's just a great story. All of this coming out of the cover and the trip and trying to map the cancels, where it was, and how it came back. So a great little story. So the journey's nearly complete. Let me follow the rates and the markings. This will hopefully help, give you a little bit more of a complete picture and the human piece. And I also wanted to identify the vessels. I was curious to see the ships, the sailing vessels or the steam vessels that this letter took. So let's go back to the cover and all of these markings. We know it was addressed to Alfred. We know that there was a Southampton manuscript in the lower corner. There was a paid 90 at the upper right, and there was this magenta 80. It arrived in Akyab. They were not in country. They crossed out Asia at the bottom. Asia's here, and they crossed it out. The manuscript Calcutta was added. There is a Calcutta manuscript there. And then this large 2 was added. This was the fee that they had to pay to return the letter from Akyab to Calcutta. So it arrives in Calcutta. The Reverend, we know, is not in country. We know he's passed. This paid 90 was added. There's another manuscript paid on the back. This was added somewhere in transit. I believe it possibly was added in New York. I don't think it was added in Warren, Ohio, because we know they paid it and they paid the postage. They also crossed out Calcutta and they added the return address. All of these manuscript markings were here to give us clues to the trip in addition to all the cancels, which really helps to round it out. Here is after a couple of weeks and months, maybe it was a few months of research and online and trying to do the retroReveal, looking at reference books, talking to colleagues that knew about, mail, transatlantic, traveling to Asia during this period, helped to summarize what happened to this little cover. So the front of the envelope denotes 90 cents paid. It had paid 90 cents. This is twice the rate, 45-cent rate from US to Father India via Southampton, known published rate at the time in 1856. And on the reverse in Warren, Ohio, they put on stamps. to pay it. This is not a small sum of dollars. 7 12 centers, 84 cents plus a pair of 3 cent, 1851, 6 cents. There's your 90 cents. They really wanted to communicate with their son-in-law and daughter at the American Missionary. From New York City, after it traveled overland by rail and then went up, it went to Boston. It got on a Cunard line steamer, Canada. I'll show you a little picture of that. It went to Liverpool, then to London, then to Southampton, right? And then it arrived in Southampton. From Southampton, we know from the cancels in the trip, it went on a P&O steamer to Alexandria in Egypt. It went overland. I don't know how it went overland. It could have went in a caravan, could have went on a number of different ways. Most likely, was traveling on a mail carrier. Well, then it went through the Red and Arabian Seas. I do not know what steamer or boat there. Much harder to figure that out. Probably was the next ship leaving port there to get to India. The Magenta 80 was written on the top, and that was an 80-cent credit to Britain for the letter carried by a British packet. Once it arrived in Liverpool to London to Southampton on a P&O steamer until it got to India, this was all carried underneath the British. The Brits got 80 cents credit due for really the bulk of the trip. The Black 42, the large black, was postage due in the US for a double rate open mail letter. This is how it was sent back by American packet. I believe it traveled on the Arago. I'll give you a little history on the Arago, the Havre line. We know it departed Southampton on the 15th. We know this tracks with the cancels, and we know that it arrived in New York. And if you remember this date, this was the date of the New York cancel, the black cancel. So most likely it traveled by this. So let's talk about all of the fees that we're looking at. If you add everything up, and I think I missed it. Yes, it's not $1.32 actually. 90 cents paid, 42 cents paid. I should add the 2-cent forwarding fee, right? So that would be $1.34. In 1856 equates to about $38. This in 2019, probably the same in 2020. A tidy sum of money to send a letter to your loved ones. But the fact that, you did not speak to them often and you probably wrote a long letter, which is why this was, I have no doubt, thick, which is why it was double weight, why it wasn't 45 cents, but 90 cents. They were writing a very long letter to check in on their family and their loved ones halfway around the world. So let's just quickly and briefly, I won't belabor you with some of the ships, but there was a lot of mail and cargo and people moving across the Atlantic and the Mediterranean to India back and forth. But at this time, a lot of business was being conducted by the British Atlantic Mail Service. And this started to expand greatly. 1847, it became very evident that the government and postal facilities were too limited. So there was a very big demand to extend commercial relations between Britain and the Americas. So Britain doubled the Atlantic Mail Service. They had a new contract with Cunard. There were vessels leaving Liverpool every Saturday for New York and Boston. They built 4 new ships, the America, the Niagara, the Europe, and the Canada. You can find ads in the newspaper. They were doing a lot of publishing, a lot of promoting. They would make note that there was an experienced surgeon on board. If you were taking a little transatlantic trip, all letters and newspapers must pass through the post office. Passage from New York to Boston to Liverpool. A first-class cabin was not inexpensive, $120. Second class was $70. You could also go in steerage, which was much less. These were very large, wooden-hulled, side-wheeled steamers. This one was constructed 1848 by the very famous Steele in Greenock, Glasgow in Scotland. And this had a very long life. It could accommodate 90 crew, 140 first-class passengers launched in 48, and then really started subsequent voyages back and forth. Its final was in December of 65, and then it became a sailing ship to Mississippi and operated until 1883, then scrapped. That's long service for a wooden-hulled side-wheel steamer of this era, which saw a lot of activity. Here's a great image of what that ship looked like. Again, a lot of this is out there if you want to search. So this is the ship that, the steamer that the letter took. And here, based upon the cancels, this is the Arago, another wooden-hulled brig. side-wheeled steamer, constructed in 1855 by Westerfeld and Sons, New York. This is for the Havre Steam Nav Company. It was named for Francois Arago. This name should ring a bell with many folks. He was a French physicist. He was a friend of Smithson, who started the Smithsonian. They both believed that, all of this thing should be preserved for history and in the public domain in the space. And if you now go online and you want to search all of the great holdings of the National Postal Museum, as you know, I sat on that council philatelist for maybe 9 years, 10 years. And when we launched our website for the National Postal Museum back in 2006, it is arago.edu, named after the Francois Arago. And so it is still up and running. And so again, it had a pretty good life. It was definitely an improvement. And it was chartered by the Department of War for Army transport during the Civil War. And so this was the steamer that the letter came back on. So how do I conclude the journey? And here I show you, and I'm giving you a teaser as to one of those 12-cent imperforate stamps that should have been on that cover, that was not on that cover. How did it appear when it was first posted? And so I'm going to get to that. Let me give you a brief conclusion as I come up against the bottom of the hour. An 1856 cover was examined. It had 20 cancels and manuscript markings. And to determine the journey that this letter took from Ohio to Far East India and back again to Boston, it took a bit of work. And this occurred over a 5-month period. When I first looked at the front of the cover and then the back, and it was missing postage and it only had some stamps, I thought this was going to be difficult. A lot of overlapping canceled, multicolored canceled, numerous faint and blurred hand stamps, multiple rates, missing postage stamps. I said, this is going to be difficult, but I like a good challenge, and I dove right on it. What are the resources that I deployed or I employed to decipher this? So, I've got a fairly good Philatelic library and beyond Philatelic, because there are a lot of references you need beyond. But that's where I started. And so I've got Winter's reference and Tabbert's reference and Ashbrook's reference and a myriad of others. Some in my own library, others which are available online, like I host at the Philatelic Society of Lancaster County. I've got an online electronic library. At the Classic Society, I have an online library, and elsewhere. Many, many tools that are out there for you to look at if you don't have access. There are other databases online, other auction catalogs and search engines like Robert A. Siegel has Power Search, to look for, other similar types of covers that might have sold in the past decades going way back. But there are other great databases that you can search, and museums and reference libraries. The digital manipulation software was invaluable. RetroReveal was a great resource to be able to unmask the cover, the cancels, the manuscript markings. Photoshop is an easy tool, and there are other very simple tools that are out there that could send you multiple links. And then, of course, nothing helps than your fellow colleagues that are stamp and postal history and foreign mail collectors or museums. So I reached out to everybody in the spirit of sharing, and folks like Dwayne Littauer and Jim Allen and Dick Winter have been invaluable. This is sort of their sweet spot, this mail, transatlantic, going out to Far East Asia. And they helped after I diagnosed it in kind of confirming the trip I thought this took, and then maybe filling in a gap or two. At the end of the day, persistence. I think I've just showed you the most plausible route that this cover took on this 5-month journey. And so my final thought, I have been looking for, and I knew what should have been on the back of that cover. And to my surprise last year, I was able to locate the block of 6 that I believe was on this cover. And I know where it is, and it is on eBay. Here again is the back of the cover. This is what I showed you at the beginning. And I knew that it said 12 cent, 1851, 9, 90 really. And then here, the little numbers, 71, 72, 73, 81, 82, 83, 84 this is really a plating marking. This is definitely something that was taken off in the not too far past. I think you could see where this would have fit in here with a partial red cancel. And I can tell you this is a New York cancel. There's YOR. This was a New York cancel. This is a Calcutta cancel, like I showed you before on the front. Here is another Calcutta cancel. So if I were to find this block or these strips, they would have these cancels that would tie them on. So I asked all my friends, I asked my colleagues, I asked Jim Allen, who collects and has won exhibits with just this stamp alone, the 12 cent. He is the 12 cent guy. And so I did find it. And there it is. And that is the missing block of 6 that appeared on this cover at one time when it was mailed. Here is the red cancel that perfectly ties with the Calcutta. Here is the corner, the red cancel. You can see on the block the creases that come across from the thickness where this was folded over. And it has the typical 7-bar grid canceling these. Absolutely, this was on this cover. It is no longer and is now being sold as a block of 6. I know where it is, and I'm hopefully will have it back in my possession at some point to reunite it with this cover. I am still looking for this particular single. That, my friends, is a tougher look. I believe it was actually an irregular block of 7, and whomever took this off at whatever point probably did a very nice, clean slice off of that and has it as a single, and now they wanted to have a nice block of 6. Why, I don't know. That's just supposition. But the good news is, there it is. That's what it looked like way back when. This is a phenomenal piece, and it really should have been kept intact, but lo and behold, it was not. But at least I was able to partially reconstruct what this cover looked like back in 1856 when it was put in the mail in Warren, Ohio, for its 5-month journey around the planet and back. So I want to, in closing, and then I can go back to the cover and I can show you it and we could ask questions. I want to thank Dwayne Littauer. This is my longtime friend and buddy at the Classic Society. You know, he is our section editor in the Chronicle for the foreign mails. He's really sort of was mentored by Dick Winter, who really helped me along the way. And Dwayne is really now taking the charge. He's got an amazing amount of knowledge on maritime postal history. I thank the others earlier as well, like Jim Allen and Dick Winter as well. I passed this by them. But any error and or omission, as I always say, is my responsibility. Hopefully this has sort of painted a picture, and I will go back because I want to go back to where it started, to this cover that I found in this lot with all these canceled on it, addressed to the Reverend in the Father India in Asia, which then went back, as you see here, to the BM rooms in Boston back in 1856-57. So I'll stop there and I'll thank you all and I'll take any questions. So well, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie, for a magnificent presentation. Tied all the loose ends together except that one stamp which is missing. I'm sure that'll turn up sometime. I think Steve Kennedy is going to monitor the questions.
I think I merged it to the window there. Can you see what it had in the chat?
So let me look at the chat. And first off, if anybody wants to ask, you can raise your hand or just shout on out and ask. But I will actually look at the chat and see what we can see.
Okay, I had one question to Charles. I have the book on the P&O, and at some time they stopped going around the Iberian Peninsula and went by rail to Brindisi. And I'm wondering if this cover went the long way around or the short way to Brindisi, or do you know?
I don't know, and that's a great point, because I discussed that with Dwayne. And we at least believe in this case, at least for the time period and the cancellations that are on there, the way it left, that we think that it most likely went the route that I showed, but that is always, I guess, a possibility. And maybe we can talk and I could look at that reference again in a little more detail to see how that
on the P&O. I mean, they, you know, all the voyages of the P&O are, and they went, you know, several ships, you know, again, went to Alexandria, and then another one took it from Alexandria to Bombay. And
absolutely. And it's possible we can narrow it down because we do know the receiver, right? We kind of know the window there. So, but that's the one piece. Once it leaves Southampton and until it arrives in Bombay, that whole little journey, right, is where I can draw that blue line a different way or add an overland. But thank you, Steve. That's a great point. So there is still that piece of it.
Did you happen to look at Robinson's book, Carrying British Mails Overseas? I believe that's the answer to Steve's question is in Robinson's book.
You mean Robertson Revisited? Gene, do you mean this? I know you can't see.
Book, I think, on the P&O.
Oh, okay, gotcha. No, I'll have to look at that, Gene. I appreciate that. So I'll go back and I'll check that.
It was published about 1964.
Yeah, I'm going to go back and I'm going to check that. So thank you for that. That's a great point.
I have to sign off for a few minutes. I've got another call coming in. So if I get back in time, I will. Great presentation, Charlie. Great.
Oh, my pleasure, Gene. Sure, please. We're going to be here, but I do see a couple of other questions and I can go through them. Or folks could ask them themselves. So Steve, so let me go here. I see Larry asked, how do you decipher the partial and overlapping cancels? Any tips for us? Did I show you, at least by using retroReveal? And I could carve it out even more and show you, because some of these are amazingly overlapped. And there were some cancels that were right under 5 cancels together. The black New York, the red New York, the 2 orange receivers, those were tougher. And for that, I got out just a regular old, my old loop at 2010 and 2030X, and I just looked under normal light. And by moving in a few different directions and by, looking with some off light, I was able to really unmask those. And then once you get the bookends there, you kind of can fill in the gaps. So that with retroReveal helped to unmask these. I hope you saw that I could do that. And I saw, Steve, you asked the question about identifying the stamps, and I hope I answered that question for you, Steve, because I showed you that I found the block of 6. Yeah.
I asked a little early.
Yeah. No, that's fine. I was getting to that. Steve, I think I answered that question again, but I think there's more to do on the Brindisi, and I agree. I definitely want to look a little more. Lisa, one might expect, yes, that Sally and Alfred would have sent the birth announcement home to Ohio. That's a great question, and motivated the parents to send a letter of congratulations. Another great question. I have not found that yet. And so I don't know that it would have been in the local newspaper, but they probably and might have communicated with them, right? And so they would have personally received the letter in Warren, which is why then they respond. So I don't have that info, but that's a great thought that's why they were writing back. And why they wrote back a lengthy letter, because it was thick enough to have to be paid twice the rate. No doubt you're only communicating very shortly. And remember, they only had left a year earlier, right? So they had only been out of country about a year and left. And I think maybe this was your one chance once a year or twice a year to write. You were going to write a lot and you were going to send them a letter. So I hope that answers that question.
Charles, Lisa is actually Paul Pitcher. I'm using my wife's computer.
Paul, don't you bait and switch me there, Paul. So thanks.
Well,
Lisa, Paul.
Difficulty.
No, I appreciate it. So, Paul, I appreciate the question, and that's a great point. You're right. That is possible.
And the other thing I would note is that cholera was a major disease in the 1850s, not only in Asia, but in the United States. There were many epidemics.
Absolutely. Isn't it funny how this letter is very relevant for what we are doing and going through at this time? And here it is back in the 1850s, not just then back in the 19-teens with, the Spanish flu. And now here we are. So you're right. I mean, very pervasive. Clearly, he did not survive. She's then enfeebled, gets on the ship. She does not survive. Fortunately, the baby did. Fortunately, we had a captain who took ownership and then delivered this young baby back to the missionary. And then she went on to live a very long and prosperous life and have many kids and grandkids and great-grandkids. So yeah, thank you, Paul, for that. Great. David, so my other friend from Ohio asking a question. Yes, if I am out in Warren, and it's not that far, I'll have to let you know, because I know you're not that far and you grew up only 15 minutes there, right? So thanks for being on this evening. Any other questions, any other thoughts, anything I could add or clarify? I will make this available. I know Steve is going to do his magic and edit it, and then we'll have a nice a digital presentation. And this presentation is in a PDF form, which I'm also happy to share with anybody. I know it's online at the the Lancaster Society's website. I can share it with Steve. We can distribute it. You've got your, 200 members, I guess, around the PA, PHS. I want to make sure that whoever needs it. And then my email. You shoot me an email if you have a question at charlesdicomo@gmail, and I can walk you through any of this on how to decipher it. But if you start with any one of your simple covers that might have a hard to see cancel, even if it's faded, and you upload it into retroReveal, many times you're going to be able to see that cancel very cleanly. And it may be the aha moment because you couldn't see the date, and now you can see the date and you can definitively place the cover in a particular time period. So any other questions? I'll stop talking.
Well, I would just say one more time, we should thank Charles for a wonderful presentation. If there are no further questions, let's give him a virtual hand clap. And thank you all. And thank you all for